Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome back. Moderating the next panel on the rise of ASEAN's digital economy is Mr. Erwan Barre, partner at RHTLaw Asia. He will be joined by Mr. Plan Panusik Chamanan, CEO, founder Eva Technologies, Mr. Patrick O'Shea, Managing Director of England & Company, and Mr. Wahab Yusof, Vice President, Asia Pacific and Japan, Delinea.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for what is going to be the third panel of this year's RCAS-CABA ASEAN Summit. A few years back at the summit, we had a discussion on new technologies and what business opportunities these new technologies could generate for ASEAN. That was back in 2019. Since then, the world has changed, as we all know. Southeast Asia is facing new challenges. COVID had hit us badly, and it has tested our sustainability and resilience. At the same time, the trade war between the US and China has become a full systemic rivalry, and cooperation between the two countries is hitting new lows. COVID and this new geopolitical landscape are new realities that we need to deal with. But not everything is about doom and gloom, thank God, and the theme of this year is opportunity and growth drivers. And one of these growth drivers is the digital economy. And to discuss these opportunities, I have with me today three distinguished panelists. Just to my right is Patrick O'Shea, who is a managing director at England & Co. England & Co. is a US investment bank with a growing presence in Singapore, and Patrick is the head of the office here, and he has decades of experience in advising technology investors. To his right is Wahab Yusof, who is the head of Japan and Asia at Delinea. Wahab brings with him 30 years of experience setting up regional HQs for tech MNCs in the region. He is an expert in IT and cybersecurity, and he sits on the board of several leading Singapore organizations, both public and private. And online with us remotely is Plan, who was introduced to you. He is the founder and CEO of Evergroup. He will tell us more about Evergroup, but Evergroup is a Thai group with operations regionally and in the US, which is improving healthcare through the use of medical data. So thank you, gentlemen, for being with me today to answer a few questions. And the first topic that I would like to talk about is resilience. 95% of the companies in the region view digitalization and resilience as aligned, according to a recent survey. During the COVID pandemic, many companies had no choice. It was a question of survival, but to adopt digitalization. Do you see this as an ongoing trend now that COVID is mostly behind us, or is it something that should stop? So maybe, Patrick, if you want to take this question first.
Sure. So, I think over the last couple of years, particularly in ASEAN, you've had this mass migration into the digital world. You've had effectively 60 million new e-commerce customers. And some of that was driven by necessity, of course, but at the same time, it's created a significant amount of momentum. Since things have begun to open up and are open fundamentally, you've had a combination of both the digital world and the physical world. And so I think generally speaking, as a momentum and as a trend going forward, I think the customer is going to want to see integration between the digital world and the physical world, and I think moving towards that will be, that is actually the direction of how things will be sustained. So you'll continue to see growth in both sectors, but what you'll also see is more integration between the two.
Plan, would you like to add something on this? I think that in your particular field, maybe you want to tell us a little bit more about Evergroup and how you see adding resilience to the healthcare market. Plan, I think you're muted. We can't hear you. Look, never mind. I'm going to ask another question to Patrick, and then we can come back to your plan, during which time our tech team will solve this issue. Patrick, do you think that we can have resilience without adherence to ESG objectives? I don't think so based on what I read, but maybe it's just me. But can digitalization help us reach these ESG objectives? I'm sorry. And this morning, one of the panelists was talking about a trade-off between E and S. And I was wondering if technology could also help us, bridge this gap between the E and the S in ESG.
Yeah. So I think one of the factors of ESG, in order to become a mainstay. Obviously, it's an important factor across multiple investment platforms and at the corporate level. But in order to be a mainstay, there has to actually be a base for which to start with. So I think a lot of the digital solutions allow you to actually create a measurement of the base of where we are relative to the E, the S, and the G. And so if you look at, like, for example, the connected buildings world, for the longest, there's all kinds of regulation that is forcing both investors but also governments to require certain thresholds around how they use energy and actually improvement upon that energy. But in order to actually do any of that, you have to have solutions that dig into the building operation, building systems to actually understand what is currently occurring and what is occurring incorrectly or what can be improved upon, and then from which you can actually measure improvement from that base. So I think for sure the digital economy will help drive that. I think without it, it actually becomes even more difficult to both establish but also to see progress.
Right, and would it also help to decrease the cost of E so that it becomes socially acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. Even within the digital world themselves, so one of the solutions around that is, of course, is the blockchain, right? So one of the abilities or one of the use cases of the blockchain is to be able to track carbon credits, but it's also the ability to sort of find the ownership of the generation of the carbon credit and sort of follow it through its life cycle. But doing that obviously has its own energy demand requirements. So even if you look at within the blockchain itself is moving towards being more environmentally friendly. So creating solutions that are allowing to actually be produced at a lower cost of E.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Plan, I think that we can hear you now, I'm told. So maybe if you can tell us a bit more about, Evergroup, how it can help increase the resilience of the healthcare sector through the use of data and digitalization.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Can you guys?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hear me right now? Perfect. So I think COVID has demonstrated to us that going physically into hospital has been a big challenge, and it's clogged up the resources need and required to also serve more serious disease as well. For example, people going to the hospital, maybe the resources there, the nurses, the doctors would be focused more towards like surgeries, heart disease, and so on. So with the rise of COVID, it has basically forced the mindset to shift from taking care of all the patients inside the hospital to make it become digital and make it more accessible to all patients, not only from the private perspective, but from the public perspective as well. And so we as a company, we come in and assist the digital transformation of these hospitals in the layer of caretaking. That's on a secondary and tertiary care. So we provide a full suite of digital application, and we have been implementing and seeing a huge rise of demand over the past 2 to 3 years during the COVID period of time. On the other front, we also do see a lot of digital adoption in telemedicine and telepharmacy application in Thailand and other neighboring countries. such as Cambodia and Laos. So these are upcoming trends that we can see that will be sticking around for sure, and it's going to continue for sure, especially in a really all hats industries such as healthcare. We're already forced to move towards more digitalization and digital economy perspective. So we do see that it's going to be a trend to keep going forward.
Well, thank you, Plan. So I take it from our discussion that digitization is definitely a resilience enabler, but resilience and growth are two different things. And what I was wondering is whether technology can also be an engine of growth in the region. I read in a survey recently that the digital economy in the region is predicted to be valued at $174 billion in GMV, gross merchandise value, by the end of this year, and $363 billion, that is double that, in 2025. Can you tell us, Plan, a little bit more about the growth of the digital economy? And I would also like to ask if GMV growth is a good proxy to assess the growth of technology as a whole.
Yes, sir. So in the case example of Thailand, we do see a huge technological and mobile phone or smartphone adoption over the past 2 to 3 years, which is a trend for the past 5 years. I believe this will bolster the digital economy for sure. And with COVID, as Patrick has mentioned, with COVID, it has accelerated the needs for digital economy even more in terms of delivery-based services or online and digital-based services, not only in the realms of startup, but even in the realms of government as well. Now we do see that a lot of services are forced to shift on the government perspective to digital and online. So that's a real movement from any perspective in terms of businesses that have already been shifted toward digital. My example use case that I've seen myself is that in today's even elderly population of 70 or 80 plus in my public hospital, they are already adopting smartphone use to use for example, personal health record services, which is on blockchain. So with the recent trends of this COVID, that's kind of forced this shift to happen, and with the things like blockchain, which decentralizes trust and newer technologies, we can see this fast growth in technological adoption, and these GMV numbers will keep growing for sure. Even in countryside Thailand, any of the province you pick, they'll be already starting to use some digital economy application specific to their local area. So there's going to be a big economy boom in Thailand. On a recent trip to Cambodia, the same is happening at the moment, delivery app, government e-services. In terms of measurement of these growth accounting of these businesses, GMV is a fundamentally kind of generic growth measurement, but I believe that we have to dig in a bit deeper to see the real value that these businesses can bring. In terms of technologies or internet platform, it's quite easy to per se mask a lot of these growth in GMVs through the utilization of demand supply matching, but the platform is not providing enough values to it, but it's matching and booking these values. So I believe that the metrics to account for this growth have to be looked at deeper and on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. So retail, healthcare are clearly two areas where there is growth thanks to technology. Patrick and Wahab, can you think of other industries where we can have this type of growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most fundamental ones is fintech, and also I would say edtech. I mean, if you look at even in the investments, you've seen within sort of Southeast Asia or the market, you've seen about something about, in terms of IT, about $17 billion invested last year, of which 27% of that was in fintech. And then this year, even though you've seen a downtrend in total investment within IT in the same market on a per head or sort of a run rate basis, you've seen an uptick in the percentage of fintech investment. So of about 58% of the first half investing has been into fintech within the region. So I think fintech is a clear one. The other factor and the reason why you've seen some of that is that in terms of fintech or digital wallets, you have the highest penetration of use of digital wallets in the ASEAN countries relative to the rest of the world. Actually, India is probably about the second, but effectively, and part of that, and a main driver of that is the percentage of the population that is coming from the unbanked world. So if you combine the concept of a higher penetration of people using smartphones plus those people having less of relying less on the existing infrastructure of the banking world, you have a much higher concentrations and use and momentum in the fintech space, which obviously is more than just e-wallets. It's retail banking, it's insurance, it's it's buy now, pay later. It's a fair amount of products that it offers. So I think that's a probably, if not the second biggest in terms of investment, but also use case.
Yeah, so coming from a technology space, I think digitalization cuts across all verticals. The question is, at what rate does each of these verticals grow? Obviously, you're talking about fintech, like what Patrick was saying, infrastructure, technology itself, manufacturing. But there are areas where digitalization is picking up very quickly. And in ASEAN, particularly the agricultural part, we are typically still very much an agrarian economy, right? Especially with Indonesia, countries like Vietnam, Thailand, even, and Philippines, right? And I've seen personally the use of technology in, for example, aggregating small farmers into bringing their products to market. And they're not big-time users of mobile phones, but certainly technology has helped them aggregate their products and services and make it easier. And in doing so, you basically have an equalization of the economy where the poor or the lower income gets an opportunity to move up. That will be a main driver. Now it's growing at a slower rate than, say, banking or finance, but certainly it will actually gather pace very, very quickly when they see the value of it. Because at the end of the day, necessity is the mother of invention, right? When you feel there's a need for it, people adopt it. And so as far as digitalization is concerned, people always look at acquisition, development, and then retention of customers. Once they adopt, then we can develop them into using more and more services. And so I don't see this abating. The real question really is connecting the dots, because it's not efficient everywhere. It's not efficient, let's say, in the healthcare sector as compared to the agricultural sector. So by the time will come when it will be, right? So it takes a bit of time, but we'll get there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what's interesting is you mentioned, Patrick, just a minute ago, that the investments last year were 17 billion in the industry, in the technology sector. That was a huge amount. That was 2021. We can all think of the major transactions that year, which were Grab, Ninjavan, GoTo, Bukalapak. But beyond that, you had a whole series of investments between 10 and 100 million, which have doubled in 2021. So the question I would like to ask to both of you is, now that we're in October, what does the landscape look like for 2022, and what is the outlook for 2023? Do you already have a view as to how the market is evolving from this, what I consider a high point in 2021?
Yeah. I think, the private market oftentimes is a derivative of what's going on in the public market. And of course, in the public market, you've seen almost a re-rating of pricing across the board, and some is more logical than others, but that will have some sort of flow down effect relative to the earlier stage investing as well. And we've seen some of pushback from investors relative to some of the valuations. But I think what's important is to disaggregate pricing from liquidity. And so even though maybe you might have some down rounds, even if you look at previous market cycles where you've seen some down rounds, 87% of companies in the last down round, or companies that got put lower valuations or down rounded in the previous cycles, got capital in the future. And if you look at sort of the overhang in the market and also the new entrants into the market, that's looking strongly in the favor of, continued growth. The other factor, particularly within this market, you just have some structural components that will, I think, help prevent too much of a, lower valuation and more capital inflow. You have this population growth, right? The structural population growth of the market will fundamentally drive a lot of the progress. So if you combine, again, the population with more percentage of the population having access to the digital economy, you just have you have much more opportunity despite some uncertainty.
Wahab?
Yeah, I think, obviously we'll be facing headwinds. There will be some sensitivity in terms of looking at how you value companies. But I think the smart money would be putting a lot of pressure on companies to do tighter and better valuations. I think investors will be more discerning as to what they would like to invest in, particularly in the startup mode, from startup to the mid-range companies. You're talking about a $10 million past investment. So I think the potential startup founders will have to be a bit more sharper in the way that they present their solutions or their products out into the market. And I think it'll be slightly more difficult to actually get the products out to the market. But I sincerely believe that there's still a lot of products and solutions that are viable for the ASEAN economy because there are a lot of problems to be solved. Right, so I don't see a slowdown in terms of the number of startups, but probably in terms of how you deploy funds into these startups will take a longer time because people are more discerning.
Right. So we might have the same volume of transactions roughly.
Yep.
Well, obviously we don't have a crystal ball, but that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
With a slightly lower valuation for now,
yep.
which means the total value of the fundraise lower as a result. And do you see that for 2022, or do you see that going forward into 2023?
Yeah, I see that going forward into 2023. I think Patrick can attest to that. I think people will obviously try to find opportunity to get a discount on on the valuation, right? Yeah.
Right, but if you've got a lot of VCs fighting for the same deals, that could have a positive impact on the pricings as well, right?
Yeah, there'll be a bit of a state of flux, I would think, right? A bit of jostling, and we'll reach a new dynamic down the road. If the economy holds, if the recession isn't too impacting ASEAN too much, I think it'll still move on at a reasonably fast rate. But if things go awry, we are affected by the global situation, then I think it will kind of put a stop to it for a while. But I have full confidence it will bring up again because there are just simply too many problems that we're facing as a market that needs this kind of products and solutions. And a lot of offerings out there.
Right. Yeah. Understood. Thank you. We were talking this morning during one of the panels about ASEAN and the situation of ASEAN and so on. It's been said many times, but it's worth repeating, I'm sure, that ASEAN is not a single market. It's not a market that you can address with a single approach.
Yeah.
So in this respect, how do you see fundraising and startup funding in different markets? Someone was saying this morning, I'm quoting, that he was referring to VIP countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, as being the big winners in the market growth generally. I would like to ask, does this acronym is also meaningful for tech companies, or is it a different acronym for tech companies?
It is. We don't particularly use VIP, but we pay attention particularly to V and P because Vietnam is obviously the fastest growing economy and Indonesia is the largest growing economy, right? And we always view Indonesia as a nation in waiting for its opportunity, like China, to actually grow rapidly. And they have a huge mass, right? 270 million people. Philippines has about 97. Vietnam has 100 over million people. So I think it presents a huge opportunity, right? So if adoption of technology is quick, you'll find that this product taking up, companies will grow very, very quickly. Right, so we do see, if we in the past companies that I've been with in cybersecurity particularly, we have always looked at that Indonesia is a must. one. Vietnam as well, although there's a bit of difference between North and South Vietnam, we find it easier to get into South because the culture is very similar to what it was before, US-centric kind of behavior, and Hanoi is the seat of the government. We typically find the opportunities are more on the southern sector of Vietnam. But yes, the answer to that is yes, because it is growing at a very quickly rapid rate. And there's a knock-on effect. I think Plan was mentioning Cambodia, Laos, you're seeing the middle income growth, disposable income growing as well. So all these are signs of good adoption, good penetration of technology. So we expect these countries to grow at a very rapid rate. Yeah, exactly.
Plan, do you have the same views? You're based in Bangkok yourself, that you're active in the region. Do you share these views, or do you have a different set of countries to look at?
I definitely share these views, and one thing that I can say is that I do see a huge growth in investment in Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia at the moment from international-based VCs. So I think a spillover of some sort will happen for sure, definitely. And there's other market I might be siding a bit, but like Thailand, where there's still a huge opportunity for growth in a really developed type of market in a way that infrastructure is here, but there are no startup or digital economy to basically reap the benefit of its built infrastructure yet. So I do see that in the next 2 to 3 years, as these regions become the net benefiter and spotlights and eyeballs come to this region, Thailand could potentially see this huge similar growth to in the technological investment sector as Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia have been seeing for the past 2 years as well.
So if I can summarize what we just heard, I take it that ASEAN is in a bright spot with positive trends at work and an optimistic outlook. But if we want to do a fair assessment of the outcome for ASEAN, I think we need to look not only at the strength but also the weaknesses, if any, obviously. And the first question I would like to ask, and I don't have the answer, is ASEAN is a sizable market. I mean, it has the same number of consumers as the European Union, basically. Is that sufficient for tech companies to scale, Patrick?
Yeah. So I think, you referenced it before. ASEAN is talked about as a market, but it really is 10 separate markets that have definitely some overlap in cross-border activity, but don't necessarily function as a single market. And so when you talk about the digital economy and you talk about value, value is seen in the ability to scale, and as a result of having slightly different market or being different markets, there are different requirements, different regulations, different consumer appetite in each of the different markets. So as successful companies, or as companies become successful in their given market within ASEAN, they're forced to move to a different market. And the question is, do they move to another ASEAN market, or do they move to a larger single market? So a lot of times that decision is to move to a larger single market. A lot of times that is the US, oftentimes it's Europe too. But that presents itself as a challenge. The other kind of component and challenge, I think, within the ASEAN market is SMEs, and SMEs' connectivity to the digital economy. So I think as SMEs have better access to the digital economy, that will help each of the markets become larger themselves, but also if you can create some sort of more cross-border similarities in terms of regulation, you'll be able to have more success stories from the global or from the ASEAN market as a general.
Right, so we have segmentation coming from the market, the structure of the market, which is different, the languages, the regulation, and so on. But maybe the easier to fix, or the most obvious to fix at this point, is regulation, right, where we could have more integration between the different markets. So I think at least some of the different markets.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think, Plan, that we've got the right resources in place to scale startups in the different markets in the region? I mean, in terms of HR, in terms of talent, in terms of infrastructure?
In terms of starting with the infrastructure perspective, I think in the Southeast Asian region, we still have to develop a lot of the infrastructure that needs to push up startup from the very seed level, from the initiation level, to a proper product development cycle, and then go to market. Because at the current moment, we are still at quite an infant stage, but there's already some great leaders who's paving the path. But I think like the ecosystem is still not there yet to accelerate this growth. Like, for example, in the US, you would see 4 or 5 cycles of innovation already happening. And if stemming out from these cycle of innovation, you could see like accelerator and startup schools, like, Y Combinator, Capital Factory, which is incubating and booming and being the ecosystem initial builder. In some countries, these things are already coming in. So you can see Y Combinator activities in, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, Vietnam, and so on. So I do think it's coming in. But for other countries, I think we still have to create some 0 to 1 type of infrastructure there, an ecosystem there, such as Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Burma, and so on, which is also a huge ASEAN-based neighboring countries. So in terms of resources, I think like the engineering resources in the region are really excellent. A lot of the global companies do actually have their base engineering work being done here, but it's more on the outsourcing perspective, so doing things by requirements. But the knowledge and know-how of how to create a product that can go to market, how to create a product that can become a unicorn or become a startup, that's something that is more of a secret sauce that I guess we have to continue to work out and create rounds of innovation.
I noticed in the US that, what also creates innovation is alumni from companies which were successful, and people from these companies have grown and set up their own company. And we call it a mafia sometimes. It's obviously not a mafia. It's just a group of people who have learned together and who are skilled together to do the same thing. Are we seeing the same thing now in Southeast Asia, now that the first startups were created a number of years ago, or is it still too early? Plan or Wahab or?
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot of positives coming out of that. It's still a bit too early compared to the US, for example, in terms of innovation. But if you go by the number of new startups that's coming out of Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Philippines, that's quite encouraging, really, right? But we're kind of behind one cycle behind the US in terms of having that kind of ecosystem environment where you have serial entrepreneurs.
Right.
We're not there yet, right? But we're almost there.
Okay.
Coming close to it, yeah.
Plan, do you share that as well? Among your peers of founders, do you have many alumni from other companies?
I think we do, but I believe that like there's still a lack of like ecosystem to transfer these really great knowledge towards newer infant startups. So I think that's still an area that Association have to focus on. But I do also see that some of these talents or some of these founders' talents or founder know-how are also like saturated in some areas, like Indonesia, Malaysia. We do see great companies that have scaled and learned how to scale. And Singapore, we do already see these companies coming up. And I believe there's a lot of companies there that has already gone in. But for the other regions or for the other countries, that's still cooking up. So it's not there at the moment.
We mentioned a bit earlier the difficulty of scaling sometimes in the markets in the region because of the differences in regulation, in market access, et cetera, et cetera. I would like to ask a more specific question about data. Many of these businesses, if not all, of the digitalization-related businesses are data-driven. Some of them are easier than others because, for example, medical regulation on data is much stricter than almost anything else. Do you see that as an issue, or what are the specific issues that data-driven businesses face in the region? Maybe Patrick on fintech, if you have that experience.
Yeah, I think I think, yeah, regulation is, and not only regulation, but the change of regulation, right? So creating opportunities, in highly regulated markets, healthcare, financial services, what you do with the data it can change over time. And so I think what, successful companies in the space have done is they've created multiple opportunities and use cases with the data that they've aggregated and have plan B and C as opposed to just having single product offerings, because once a change in regulatory and regulation relative to data can completely change the roadmap.
Turning to another topic, unless you wanted to add something, Plan? No?
Yes, I do share with what Patrick has said. And in terms of healthcare data, I can share the views that healthcare data are highly regulated across the countries, as Erwan has mentioned. So I think that actually being able to comply to the full extent give us an easier shift, because healthcare data regulation hasn't changed as much. So it's kind of give a very stable kind of regulatory framework for us to follow, but more on the shifting and changing political views. I would say that's more of an issue of different places where it can create a regulatory shifting, and it could be potentially really hard to follow this change in the direction of the political regulatory framework. But overall, I think that's something that that's still an issue to homogenize across the country. So a lot of times startups or company tends to just follow GDPR, PDPA, some global standards, so that they can basically benchmark themselves against these more global standards rather than following these changing or shifting regulatory framework that would be less or more in terms of compliance at any given time.
Yeah, Erwan, if I may add, coming from the tech angle, you will realize that it's an issue, but also an opportunity. What many companies are going through now in digitalization is the problem with classification of data, rather making sense out of it. Because if you can't classify it, then you can't make sense of it. You can't do analytics on it. So in areas like healthcare, for example, in Plan's case, where there are defined rules on how you collect data, that helps. But in general, there isn't any rules on how you actually classify data. So you find that many companies, including legal companies like yourself, will have a difficult time trying to classify the kind of information that you need to, how do you actually use that information, is what Patrick was alluding to. And there's lots of opportunity, if you manage to classify it well. And then you also have, as a result of that, the growth of the chief knowledge officer, right, of chief data officer, the roles that you never heard of at the turn of the century, right? But now you have the need for all of this, because you need to gather, once you are able to make sense of the data, classify it in the way that's most useful to you, that's when you start to become profitable.
Right, so data in itself doesn't have value, it's the way that you have the data stored and organized that has value.
Correct, that's right.
Yeah, and I would like to add one really quick important topic here, is that in today's world, as we are coming towards the blockchain and Web 3.0 era, for my sense, not entirely about token, but it could be about the shared or the decentralized values that patients can now, or users can now fully own their own data in any given platform, but still allowing them to exchange it with other any other stakeholders in a very secure way. So I believe that rather than following this regulatory framework, we are at this turning point opportunities where we can just jump directly, and that's the leapfrog benefits that we can do. All countries in ASEAN can and Southeast Asia can leapfrog towards decentralized and shared value, which already bypass these content-based data logging in databases, or even PDPA, GDPR, or more, because it's directly at the user consent by themselves using newer more frontier technologies.
Right.
And another risk or weakness that I would like to talk about for a few minutes is cybersecurity. I see in the US and in Europe that many companies are talking about this as being a risk.
Yeah.
And I would like to ask you this question. Is this considered a big risk in the region? And are there specific reasons why it is considered a risk in the region?
Yeah, it's driven mainly by our digital lifestyle. We're going full-blown on or full-on digital. So as a result of that, going into the digital realm means that cybersecurity must be underpinned by cybersecurity, right? Good cybersecurity practice, good cybersecurity hygiene, knowledge of what cybersecurity is and how we practice it, the training and coaching of our own citizens on what cybersecurity is all about. That will be crucial to us. Else you'll find that it may affect the way we digitalize and may put a stop to some areas where we need to digitalize, right? I mean, you've heard of the recent ransomware situation, the scam, the phishing attempts. This will not stop, right? And all the bad actors will find new ways, right, to circumvent that process. So it's a cat and mouse game that we play here, right? But we always look forward to the ultimate value of going digital, because it's supposed to enhance our lifestyle, make life easier, information access to everyone equally everywhere, right? So that's the holy grail of having digitalization. But yes, that cybersecurity will be one of the main issues that we'll continually have to address.
And one thing that I heard from investors, well, we are representing investors, you are working with them as well. One thing that we heard from investors coming from the US, for example, and investing into the region is they were surprised or taken aback by the absence of insurance for cybersecurity, unlike in the US, for instance, for one, and two, a lack of information and monitoring of cybersecurity. So when you would ask a company in the region, have you had breaches? People would either not be able to answer, or they would say, no, we have not had breaches, which seemed surprising to them, to say the least. Do you have similar experience?
Yes, I'm a bit surprised why the US think that they have an upper hand in terms of cyber security insurance, because we're all in the same boat, really. And the only way to do insurance for cybersecurity is that to have knowledge of what's in the enterprise or what's in the company or what's in the SMB companies. And we don't really know, right? So unless your enterprise or companies are very matured and have a very good framework of cybersecurity, you can define how you insure that company against cyber attacks. Otherwise, we're all in the same boat, right? And that's what really is the gray area for cybersecurity insurance at this point in time. Lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the U.S., cybersecurity is not really, risk is not really thought of as a separate entity. It's a business risk. It is a fundamental risk of operating, just like losing a customer. And I think, that mentality needs to be present, I think, globally, frankly. There's no region that is averse to or is not subject to cybersecurity risk. And so I think the more it becomes a business risk, it'll be more tracked, just like any other business risk. And then once you can track it, then you can identify the weaknesses.
It is enterprise risk, right? If you look at it, is part of enterprise risk. But again, not everyone looks at it in the same way, and that creates a bit of a problem.
Right, and I guess it also depends on the business model, because if you are in a factory, in a manufacturing business, unless you have a single factory, if one of the factory burns down, well, you're losing part of your assets. But if you lose your entire data set and you're a digitalized company, well, you could lose pretty much all your going concern or goodwill.
Exactly.
I would like to move to another topic, well, obviously still related to our topic of the day, which is technology, but we heard a lot this morning about the China-US rivalry, and this morning I heard one of our panelists saying, and I quote him, that status quo is great for ASEAN. So I would like to talk about this. We've seen a steady deterioration of the relationship between China and the US. From 2016 to 2020, roughly, it was a trade war, and that was pretty clear. It was a bilateral relation. Now we're talking about a decoupling. And what I'm hearing from European or US clients is a lot of concern about this decoupling, what it implies, what it means for their business. And it could mean restricted use of intellectual property, lower access to certain assets, including technology assets like semiconductors. I would like to know if these threats keep business leaders awake at night here in ASEAN, or do they view things differently? And maybe the three of you probably can shed some light on this.
Well, I think generally speaking, the decoupling for ASEAN is more of an opportunity than a concern. I think to be mindful of the decoupling, I think, is something to keep you up at night. But I don't think the fact of it happening is in and of itself a risk. And I agree with whoever said that status quo is the way to be, is because I think staying as neutral as possible and being able to appeal to both markets as they decouple is critical and will create opportunities for the ASEAN region. So I don't, but I think you've seen recently, obviously the ASEAN region has always been important to the United States, but I think it's been higher raised as a priority of making sure that we are coordinated as much as possible. So, I think it's that in and of itself creates maybe some incremental opportunity for companies and people here.
I tend to agree with Patrick. On the ground, again, with a technology company, we are aware of it, we are cognizant of it, and we are watchful and mindful of how we do business operations. But generally speaking, it has not hindered the way that we operate in terms of how we sell, how we position the products and services in the market. It's not really hindered that. I don't see that happening anytime soon as well, because at the end of the day, customers look for the best solutions to answer their business issues and problems. So I think, again, similar to what Patrick and what you said, the status quo is kind of favors us to a great extent. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Plan, what's your take on this?
I fully agree with the status quo, and there's already been examples of even the case of Thailand, where production of some certain commodities, processed commodities, has been shifted to Thailand, and people would be surprised. So certainly, why Thailand in the northern area this year already seen a huge export of some certain commodities to the US, and it's already the benefit is already here. The locals of the Southeast Asian region have already seen the benefit of of this happening. And in terms of technologies-wise, I think because technologies that you see something that could potentially be re-accelerated or catalyst. So I think this could be a great catalyst towards the Southeast Asian region to be the eyeballs of the world, to be the spotlight of the world, and to comes up to be the next tech investment region. And we're already seeing this happening with large VCs and accelerator in the US coming into Southeast Asia to explore opportunities here.
Well, I would like to follow up on this plan. You're right that one of the consequences of this, whatever you call it, decoupling, trade war, whatever, is that China investors or businesses are going less and less into the US and into Europe because they feel that the barrier is higher. And so therefore they're coming more into Southeast Asia. And I would like to ask you this question. What are we seeing? What are they looking for into Southeast Asia? Are they looking for markets? Are they looking for talent? Are they looking for technologies? What are they looking for in this region?
From my first example, they're just looking for a different place to bypass their legal barrier to export commodities, just ship the production to Thailand instead and export from there, or just basically logistic-wise move the commodity to Thailand first and export from a Thai company to the US side. So I think that's one side of thing. They're looking for new production base or something that can be more neutral for their exportation to continue and their service to continue. But on the other front, actually in Thailand, we do see a lot of eyeballs or spotlight coming from the Chinese to come to Thailand to work here and to also find newer jobs opportunity here as well. We see 100,000 Chinese work applicants the past 3 months coming to Thailand. So maybe that's a mix of different things that's gonna come by, as well as investment, where we do see huge tech conferences like Huawei conferences in Phuket just 2 weeks ago. They're really coming in to penetrate the market on all levels, the governments, the businesses, and even on the perspective of the social and talents penetration level.
A related question I would have is, we were talking a bit earlier about the segregation between the markets within ASEAN, and you were saying rightly that ASEAN companies were looking for larger markets rather than going into another ASEAN country sometimes because it didn't make sense. Right. We can think intuitively about two larger markets, which are China and the US. In this current time, do we see ASEAN companies going more into the US or going more into China? Which one do they think, generally, and without going into the politics, obviously, which one do they see as a better market to address from ASEAN?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot more fluidity, particularly around digital solutions between ASEAN and the U.S. You know, China tends to have its own ecosystem and solutions, and a lot of the technological advancements that China has made in the digital world are very China-specific. So, in order for either an ASEAN solution or a Chinese solution to come here, there's a lot of patchwork that needs to be done. Whereas the fluidity is a lot easier to kind of jump into the U.S. market, and of course regulation is a big factor of that too, in terms of acceptance around you know, foreign products within the market.
Yeah, I'd agree that to that generally. It seems that the barrier to entry to US being what it is, it's easier that way. However, that said, there have been instances and examples where if a company was smart enough to partner or do a JV or do a collaboration with its Chinese counterpart, they may be able to break into the Chinese market. I've seen it happen over the last few years, more so than say maybe 5 years ago. So
that's very interesting, because what we're hearing, for example, in Europe, is that European companies tend to not do joint ventures in China anymore because they feel that it's a scam. Well, that's a way of saying it, obviously. But what they're saying is that the opportunity is not worth the risk anymore. But it seems that it's different here.
There are, I think perhaps culturally we are more attuned to China. I would say so, being part of Asia Pacific. So I think, but there were also hard lessons learned for countries like Singapore, right? The Suzhou Industrial Park is one such example. So I think lessons learned, and they'll be going there with a much smarter and sharper mindset. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for answering all my questions. But I'm not the only one asking questions here. We've got 5 minutes left, and we have probably colleagues joining us from other ASEAN Plus Group law firms. So we should have online Rizwi Woon from Singapore, who should be with us today, and Sonny Im and Timothy Dickens from DR and Aju from Seoul in Korea. And I'm looking at the questions. I have some questions that I would like to ask them. So can you please confirm that you're here?
Hi, this is Tim. I am here. Let me get my video on. There you go.
Hi, Tim. Hi, Tim. Good to see you.
Hi.
Good to see you.
You too.
Actually, I had a question from the audience that is, you know, not directly towards Korea, but probably you can answer that. We were talking about the RCEP and the data protection and the opportunities created by RCEP. What is the view from Korea regarding this? Does it create opportunities in terms of international trade, and does it create, you know, opportunities in terms of data transit between Korea and other Asian countries?
Well, I think so. And I mean, it's such a broad spectrum in terms of, you know, how much data there is and the kind of data that we'll start sharing. And from a legal perspective, obviously, that means there's a huge amount of regulations that have to be considered in terms of how do we transfer it, how do we keep it, how do we process it, and the kind of information that's used. One of the key sort of points from the new Korean government perspective, at least in terms of the way that we use data, particularly from online shopping sectors, is moving towards a more sort of self-regulatory approach by companies. So as opposed to the previous government, where they followed a sort of much more stricter approach in terms of the traditional data protection laws in Korea, what the new government is doing is sort of putting task force together. So together with the government and the private entities, you know, coming up with ways in which they create this sort of self-regulation guideline related to the emerging technologies. So that would mean the data management, artificial intelligence in terms of how that data is put across to, or at least saved for the individual. So I think from our perspective, that's a very new introduction of policy by the government, which I think it's still in infancy stage. But I do think in terms of the way that data is managed and the absolute huge amount of data that there is, I think it's impossible for governments to maintain the regulation at a speed in which the technologies develop. So I think that's the feather in the cap for the current Korean government. But again, it does leave a bit of uncertainty as to, you know, who makes the final decisions, what would be relevant in terms of, you know, self-regulation, what would be the standards, etc. So I think it leaves a huge amount of work to be done, particularly from a legal perspective as well.
Right, I think that's going to be our duty for the months to come. Our CEP is still pretty new, but I'm sure that it can bring opportunities to Southeast Asia as well in terms of data exchange between the different countries which are a member of the RCEP, and maybe RCEP could be a short way to shortcut ASEAN in a sense, where you would have, thanks to this accord, an easier and seamless circulation of data between countries. Well, with this, I would like to thank you for participating and enlightening us on this very interesting discussion. Thank you, Wahab. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Plan. And I will let the second panel of the afternoon take over. Thank you very much.
Thank you.